All right. While most of us are streaming in, I would like to welcome you to the new lunchtime talk today. Before introducing our speaker, let me remind you of the coming events. Next week, we have one lunchtime talk on Tuesday at noon by Sabrina Smith from the University of New Hampshire, who was supposed to be giving us a talk last semester, but wasn't able to do that. And she will be talking about turning race inside out. On Wednesday, Lee Smolin from the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics will be talking in the Senior Visiting Fellow Seminar, Cosmology Beyond Space-Time, and his lecture will be at 10:15 a.m. on Wednesday. On Friday next week, there is no lunchtime talk because there is the first annual lecture series of the 2021, and it's going to be given by John Ioannidis from Stanford University at 3:30 p.m. on Friday next week, and the title of his lecture will be Reproducible and Useful Research, Changing Research Practices. So you're all invited to this lecture. If you want to join us on Zoom, go to the center's website, look for the calendar, and click, and you'll find all the links to register to any of these events. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce Paolo Palmieri's talk. Paolo is an associate professor in the Department of History and Philosophy of Science at Pitt, so he's my wonderful colleague, and in the Department of History and Philosophy of Science here. He works on a range of different topics. He's made his name, I think that's not an exaggeration, by his early work on Galileo, his very important work on Galileo. But his research in the history of science is actually much broader. It spans centuries, from the late Middle Ages to the 20th century. And he's done actually a lot of work around science issues about in phenomenology, pragmatism, and so on and so forth. And today, Paolo is going to be giving a talk on thermodynamic myths, which is, I didn't know that was also one of Paolo's research areas. So I'm actually really curious to hear more about that. Paolo, the floor is yours.
Okay, it's mine. So good morning, or actually good afternoon, everybody. I can't see anybody, which is strange for me. So I hope that if there is anything that doesn't go well while I'm talking to you, or
I'll let you know, Paolo.
Yeah, Edward will be monitoring the situation here, because without feedback wow, it's strange. Anyway, okay, so at some point, I don't know how you will be seeing me. I hope that you will have a large enough screen, because everything which I will be using, my materials, will pass through the streaming. So I'm not going to share anything except that things will look something like this to you. And occasionally, if there are texts, probably what you want to do is to maximize my picture so that you can follow the text. Okay, so let's get started. I will try to be disciplined and stop early so that there will be plenty of time for conversation and questions. Partly because this talk was conceived months ago, and when I conceived it and when I wrote the abstract for this talk, I had some ideas, and then of course I knew that these ideas were not going probably to be exactly the same 6 months later, and in fact this turned out to be the case. Let me tell you exactly what the agenda here is, what it will look like for you. Where I want to go is to raise the issue of myth and science, how they are, what kind of relationship and how they are, I think, related and necessarily so. Partly this is motivated by teaching responsibilities. In the HPS program, we teach a class for the undergraduate students. It's long been in the catalog, and this class is in fact entitled Myth and Science. And it cast an eye on the transition from mythical to philosophical thinking in ancient Greece. What I would like to do is to actually focus and narrow, start by narrowing the focus on questions of contemporary science, and then regress and raise some other questions. Let me say that part of the talk is much better organized, and another part of the talk, which is the second part of the talk, will be a little bit more freestyle. I did not really come to a point where I have absolutely compelling conclusions. So something that struck me in contemporary science, by contemporary science, I mean 20th century science or turn of the 20th century science, is the presence in thermodynamics of a vein of literature which comes under the heading of Maxwell's demon. This literature is vast. I keep reading, also recently I read reviews. It's alive and well. It's productive of something. What it is productive of, it is not entirely clear. I will not be going into the details of this literature on Maxwell's demon. There are colleagues of mine in the HPS department which have already done so. John Norton and John Ehrman wrote articles reviewing this literature. Also, I know that John Norton has an active line of research. He keeps doing this work, and therefore, for anything which is technically related to this literature, I will refer you to John's website, where he has references to articles published. Something that struck me in conversation with John also about this literature is that reviewing this literature led them, both John Norton and John Ehrman, to unsatisfactory conclusions. And why this is the case, and however, why is it also the case that this state persists? I think that what I would like to do, my style is always, when something captures my imagination, I follow the principle of going back to the origin. If I try and find the original sources, find the sources of a problem, find the beginning, the origin of questions. So I think that also for the benefit of those of you who may not be familiar with this kind of literature, don't worry, we're not going to go into technical details, but at least some of the original materials, I think that it would be worth rehearsing together how this got started. So let me now switch my video here. If all goes well, a snippet of video will be streaming. There you go. And this is interesting, is actually, I suggest that you maximize this because there are going to be subtitles. And you need to probably read the subtitles unless you can follow the German. This is Max Planck.
Wenn man wie ich im 85. Lebensjahr steht, dann empfindet man wohl stärker als sonst das Bedürfnis, sich mal klar zu machen, wie das Leben verlaufen ist, eine Rückschau zu halten auf den bisherigen Werdegang und in zusammenfassender Betrachtung sich und anderen Rechenschaft zu geben über das Erstrebte und Erreichte. Und schließlich wohl auch noch einen letzten Blick in die Zukunft zu werfen. Ich stamme mit meiner ganzen Familie aus dem Schwabenland. Mein Urgroßvater ist von Nürtingen bei Stuttgart nach Göttingen gezogen. Und von da an sind seine Kinder und Enkel und Urenkel in Norddeutschland herumgezogen und haben sich da verbreitet. Die meisten von ihnen waren Theologen, Philologen, und ich bin wohl der Einzige, der aus der Art gesprungen ist und Naturwissenschaftler geworden bin. Ich schiebe das auf Umwelteinflüsse, denn in meiner Schule wurde ich angeregt durch meinen Mathematiklehrer, der hieß Hermann Müller, ein sehr humoristischer, strenger Mann, der uns aber für alles begeisterte, was mit Mathematik und Naturwissenschaft zusammenhing. Einerseits die Strenge der mathematischen Methode, andererseits die Erhabenheit und Schönheit der Gesetze, die in der Natur herrschen. Und damals schon ist mir das Ideal meiner ganzen wissenschaftlichen Tätigkeit aufgegangen, dem ich auch heute noch nachhänge, der Harmonie nachzuspüren, welche herrscht einerseits zwischen der Strenge der Mathematik und andererseits zwischen der Fülle der Naturgesetze, die uns umgeben. Und dem entspricht die Möglichkeit, mit der Schärfe unserer Logik, der menschlichen Gedanken, die Natur zu meistern, die Übereinstimmung zu suchen dieser logischen Gesetze mit den Gesetzen der Natur. Auf diese Weise gelangen wir auch zur Herrschaft über die Natur. Und das schien mir immer das allerschönste Ziel alles wissenschaftlichen Strebens. Denn die Mechanik, die schien mir schon völlig ausgeschöpft zu sein, während die Hauptsätze der Thermodynamik für alle Naturvorgänge Gültigkeit beanspruchen. Unabhängig davon, welche Vorstellungen man sich von der Beschaffenheit der Materie macht, ob man sie sich atomistisch oder kontinuierlich konstituiert denkt. Insbesondere interessierte mich der von Clausius eingeführte Begriff der Entropie. Die Entropie ist eine Größe, welche neben der Energie wohl das Allerwichtigste der ganzen Natur vorstellt. Die Energie bleibt konstant, die Entropie wächst aber immerfort, sie kann niemals abnehmen. Und darin beruht das Wesen des zweiten Hauptsatzes der Wärmetheorie, dass die Entropie eines Systems von Körpern immer nur zunehmen kann. Im Grenzfall bleibt sie gleich. Nimmt sie zu, dann ist der Vorgang irreversibel. Bleibt sie gleich, dann ist der Vorgang reversibel. Dann kann man ihn auch rückwärts verlaufen lassen. Das ist der große Unterschied unter allen Naturgesetzen. Und thermodynamisches Gleichgewicht ist dann vorhanden, wenn die Entropie ihren Maximalwert erreicht hat. Wenn sie nicht mehr wachsen kann, dann kann auch keine Veränderung mehr eintreten. Aus diesem Satze gehen alle Eigenschaften eines thermodynamischen Gleichgewichts hervor. Und diesen Satz, den wandle ich nun an auf physikalisch-chemische Gleichgewichte und auf Strahlungsgleichgewichte. Gegenwärtig steht die neueste Entwicklung der Physik im Zeichen der Einführung der Quantentheorie. Die Quantentheorie ist ein neuer Schritt auf dem Wege der Naturerkenntnis. Und viele hervorragende Physiker sind geneigt, den jetzigen Standpunkt, den sie erreicht hat, schon als einen neuen Haltepunkt zu betrachten, als einen endgültigen Abschluss unserer Untersuchungen über die Naturgesetze. Ich gehöre nicht zu ihnen. Ich glaube, dass die Quantentheorie noch nicht zur vollen Reife, zum vollen Abschluss gelangt ist. Ich glaube, dass wir in unseren Begriffen noch manche Verallgemeinerungen, manche Abstraktionen vornehmen müssen, um zu einem ähnlich befriedigenden Verständnis der Naturgesetze zu kommen, wie sie früher die klassische Theorie gewährt hat, die wir jetzt aufgeben mussten. Ich glaube, dass die Arbeit noch weiter, viel weiter laufen muss, ehe wir zu einem solchen Abschluss gelangen. Das ist ja in einer gewissen Sinne etwas unbefriedigend, aber andererseits ist es auch im Grunde sehr sachgemäß und erfreulich, denn zum Abschluss, zum Endgültigen werden wir nie kommen. Das wissenschaftliche Arbeiten wird nie aufhören. Es wäre schlimm, wenn es aufhören würde. Denn wenn es keine Probleme mehr gäbe, dann würde man die Hände in den Schoß legen und den Kopf zur Ruhe und würde nicht mehr arbeiten. Und Ruhe ist Stillstand und Ruhe ist Tod in wissenschaftlicher Beziehung. Das Glück des Forschers besteht nicht darin, eine Wahrheit zu besitzen, sondern die Wahrheit zu erringen. Und in diesem fortschreitenden, erfolgreichen Suchen nach der Wahrheit, da liegt die eigentliche Befriedigung. Das Suchen an sich befriedigt natürlich noch nicht, es muss erfolgreich sein. Aber dieses erfolgreiche Arbeiten, das ist dasjenige, was den Quell jeder Anstrengung und auch den Quell eines jeden geistigen Genusses darstellt. Wenn der Quell versiegt, wenn die Wahrheit gefunden ist, dann ist es zu Ende, dann kann man sich geistig und körperlich schlafen legen. Aber dafür ist gesorgt, dass wir das nicht erleben und darin besteht unser Glück.
Okay, so that was Max Planck. I hope that you could see the subtitles unless you could follow the German. Planck does not belong to that group of physicists who think that with quantum physics there will be a definitive answer to our problems. That was my first approach to the issue. I wanted to explore, is there in Max Planck a reflection of this problem of Maxwell's demon? And actually there isn't, but I found something at least equally, if not more interesting, in his lectures on theoretical physics, which he was invited to give in 1909 here in the United States at Columbia Universities. And something that strikes me in his analysis of thermodynamics is the emphasis on reversible and irreversible processes, and how we have been able, or at least the scientific community has been able to transition from an understanding of conservation laws, the conservation of energy, and the second law of thermodynamics, which is somehow a sort of move away from what Planck thinks is one of the great sins of science, the sin of anthropomorphism. How does this happen? How did the scientific community succeed in achieving this move away from anthropomorphism? One of the themes which is extremely very present and very strong in these lectures on theoretical physics is the problem of anthropomorphism. So there isn't actually a discussion of Maxwell's demon in Planck, although this was given in 1909, a decade into the 20th century, when that kind of discussions had already been undergoing for quite some time. There is, however, here something which possibly is even more interesting to my mind. I will come back to this in a moment. First, I want to look again at the original sources. So how this was described in the theory of in the theory of heat, which should be up on the screen right now, the quote. So here is Maxwell's original formulation. He does not use the word demon. Demon does not seem to be the word that Maxwell originally used. Maxwell simply speaks of a being. We conceive of a being whose faculties are so sharpened that he can follow every molecule in its course. Such a being whose attributes are still as essentially finite as ours would be able to do what is at present impossible to us. I think that's something that could be interesting to explore, which I don't think has ever been taken seriously enough in this literature, is that can we take the point of view of this being and try and explore what this being is characterized and what his faculties, his abilities are, his psychology also. What kind of psychology, what kind of mentality this being or demon has, later it will be called, looks like. And then he goes on to describe the contraption by means of which this entity, this being, is supposed to do what? Is supposed to do what? Well, we'll see in a moment what he's supposed to achieve with this thing. The next slide, following this train of thought of exploring what this entity or being looks like, is a comment which was made by Thomson or Kelvin on Maxwell's being. And here we see, I think, for the first time, the idea of the demon is used. So I think that probably Kelvin was the first one who paraphrased Maxwell's being in terms of demon. And here he becomes something, an intelligent demon, or in this case, he conceives also of an entire battalion, an army, a population of these intelligent demons. And in a footnote, I hope you can make out the footnote, we are told something interesting about this. The definition of a demon, according to the use of this word by Maxwell, but actually Maxwell did not use the word demon, is that of an intelligent being endowed with the free will and fine enough tactile and perceptive organization to give him the faculty of observing and influencing individual molecules of matters. Reading in between the lines of these comments of these physicists, one has the impression that there was something of a discussion, of a puzzlement going on about the status of this entity or being, or by now he's become a demon. There's another writing by, it was found in Maxwell's manuscripts, which is entitled, a short note entitled "A Note Concerning Demons." And this also survives in manuscript form. We'll see in a moment. And here is Maxwell reflecting on demons and puzzled why his being came to be known as a demon. So who gave them this name? Thomson. What were they by nature? Very small but very lively beings, capable of obeying orders but incapable of doing work, but able to open and shut valves which move without friction or inertia. And then at the bottom, if you can read the bottom of the note, there's an interesting comment here. This reduces the demon to a valve. call him no more a demon, but a valve, like that of a hydraulic ram, suppose. Okay. Here is the original manuscript, where the phrase capable of obeying orders, which has been bracketed in the printed edition, actually is crossed out by Maxwell. So the early history of the psychology or of the demon is very interesting. It seems to be undergoing a number of different characterizations. I was particularly struck by the fact that there is this comment that this reduces the demon to a valve, a mechanical something. I think that this is the very early beginning of this process of transforming the abilities or the capabilities of this being or demon into, or giving it a mechanistic interpretation. Now, what has all this to do with my topic today, which is moving into myth and science? One other thing which I would like to say is that in the 8 lectures on theoretical physics by Planck, where you will find exactly repeating the same lines of thought that he's describing in this late interview or film, which was made in, I believe, early 1940s. There isn't actually a discussion of the demon, but there is an implicit, I think, a passage in which implicitly Planck dismisses the relevance of this approach to the microphysics, the thermodynamics of microphysics. He dismisses as being probably irrelevant. I think it's an important passage. I think is worth quoting because he quotes, he discusses very briefly the problem of Brownian motion, which by that time had already been discussed in the literature. Does the principle of increase of entropy possess a meaning for the so-called Brownian molecular movement of a suspended particle? The entropy principle is just as little valid for a single suspended particle as for an atom, and therefore is not valid for a few of them, but only where there is a large number of, so that we can get definite mean values. That one is able to see the particles and not the atoms makes no difference because the progress of a process does not depend upon the power of an observing instrument. The question with regard to the useful work plays no role in this connection. Strictly speaking, this possesses in general no objective physical meaning. It does not admit of an answer without reference to the scheme of the physicist or technician who proposes to make use of the work in question. The second law, therefore, has fundamentally nothing to do with the idea of useful work. It's a way of saying, I think, that not much can be gained in terms of clarity about the status of the second law of thermodynamics by following this approach of demons and little creatures. However, there is something else which is, I think, interesting in these lectures, which, although it does not look like another take on the thought experiment, if that is what it is, of the demon, is an attempt to describe a situation of an observer, which Planck calls a micro-observer, who would sort of be endowed with special perceptual abilities and is sort of shrunk, made very, very small, small enough to see the microscopic state. And then he compares and contrasts this with the macroscopic observer. And he calls one the microscopic observer and the second one the macroscopic observer. Here is, I think, the passage very interesting because unlike the literature on demons and mechanical incarnations of this thing, which all emphasize more the technological possibility of implementing and realizing something like the description of the powers and capacities of this demon. In this passage, Planck points us to really the actual powers of observation. What would a microscopic observer be able to see? And something which struck me at the since the very beginning in this passage is that it looks like a thought experiment. I think to a certain extent it can be described as a thought experiment. But the microscopic observer is there to see something. However, the powers of seeing and observing must be somehow restricted. Planck says that this observer should accept in principle some assumptions to the fact that some of the possibility of seeing are going to be restricted or ruled out at all. So there's an interesting interpretation there of the demon. But what is striking is that this micro-observer does not seem to have actually the freedom to observe. From then on, Planck develops his own theory of the elementary disorder, which is, in his own view, what has to be seen or observed in the microscopic realm in order for the second law of thermodynamics to give us in the microscopic realm the tendency to increase. So this pointed me in the direction of why, as physics at its most advanced, why is a science, one of the most advanced sciences, mathematical physics, still today has at its core a live literature where these discussions seem to be very important, seem to be actually essential. And are they this pointing us into a direction of, is this manifestation of a style of thinking which to a certain extent can be described as mythical? Now, the word mythical and the word myth here should be, I should make a disclaimer here, because the word myth is, I wouldn't say misheard in English, but it came to have a connotation of untrue. We say, oh, this is a myth, this is, and we mean this is legend, this is not true, and so on. So from now on, we should make an effort, you should make an effort, resist the temptation to hear this word myth in this meaning of something which is untrue. Myth, all mythological systems, including the Greek mythical body of literature, the Greek myth that we teach in the class Myth and Science, have within themselves a certain relationship to truth. So this meaning of myth as something not being true is secondary, is derivative, it's a mishearing of the word myth. So try to resist that for a while. So how can we think about myth? I'm not a mythologist, I'm not an anthropologist, I do not have any special preparation. But looking at the history of science, history of philosophy within the limited context of Western civilization, the narrative that we also teach in our core seminars, the transition from antiquity into early modernity, the rise of modern science, the consolidation of the structures of modern science in the 19th and 20th century. So limiting the scope of my analysis to this, I can see 2 or 3 ways of approaching the question: what is mythical thinking? How does it relate to rational or scientific thinking? And is modern science somehow, what is the relationship in modern science of mythical to rational scientific thinking? Let me go back to my slides. There we go. So 2 approaches which came to be prominent in modernity. One is something that persists very much into the 18th century. Newton is right on this question of myth. Is this the idea that myth somehow can be read as an allegory? The Renaissance, the 17th century, the 18th century, including Newton, there is one powerful line of thinking about myth that presents myth as if myth is an allegory of a truth which is being disguised under the form of a tale, a story. In this passage, which is the story of Proteus or matter, is taken from Francis Bacon's work on the wisdom of the ancients. And this little work, which is a very interesting work, is nothing but a collection of myth, Greek myth, and interpretations of Greek myth following this approach that myth is an allegory of something of a truth which is being disguised in the form of a tale, of a story. In the case of Proteus, the story of Proteus is this creature that undergoes transformations of shape, and his form is impossible to capture. Whoever wants to seize him has to engage in a struggle, because Proteus will constantly keep changing its own appearances and form. Bacon goes on to interpret this story, saying this is an allegory of matter. Matter is like this. It is subject to endless transformation. It's elusive. This approach to myth is also very much present in Newton. Why? Because this is the powerful ideology of the Renaissance, that the ancients knew, had knowledge which we do not have, and knowledge which we are recovering, and knowledge which actually was pristine, powerful, and possibly even much more advanced than the knowledge that we possess at the present time. This is the reason why Newton, for a long time, cherished the project of including in the final edition of the Principia a section of paragraphs where he was wanted to demonstrate that the theory of universal gravitation was indeed already known to the Pythagoreans in antiquity, and then he has done nothing but revive and recover this knowledge. So myth as an allegory, and the ancients as being in the possession of a knowledge far superior to the knowledge of us in the present time, is one way of thinking about myth. However, there is another possibility, or actually gazillion other possibilities, and one which I find particularly interested is started with what we might say very roughly, I'm sorry if there are anthropologists around here, the beginning of modern anthropology with the thinking of Giambattista Vico. If you are familiar with modern philosophy, probably you know Cartesianism. Giambattista Vico, as news for you, is one of the great anti-enlightenment and destroyers of Cartesian philosophy. You need absolutely to know your Giambattista Vico if you want to understand another crucial way of reading myth. All of this thinking about myth being an allegory of an original wisdom and knowledge of the ancients, which we don't know, is totally bogus, says Vico. In reality, ancient cultures did not have any knowledge which is superior to our knowledge. Myths are a pristine form of thinking, an original form of thinking, which are not allegories. They should not be taken as allegories of anything. So here is the same example of Proteus, compare and contrast with Bacon, what Vico has to say. Scholars think that poets meant first matter in the fable of Proteus. Proteus in the water, and the hero, in this case, Odysseus, out of it, unable to get a grip on the monster, and keeps assuming new forms. But scholars thus made sublime learning out of what was doltishness and simplicity on the part of the first men who thought from the various modification of their own shapes and gestures. There must be a man in water, forever changing into different shapes. So myth is not an allegory. Myth is a structure of human thinking, a way of thinking, and a way of thinking which persists, which is not going to be superseded by rational thinking, but which coexists with rational thinking. A third interesting way of thinking about myth, again, going back to Newton, as I was a graduate student in London doing my doctoral work, in 1999 and 2000, and the British Library was transferred from its original location in the British Museum to a new site. And to celebrate this great transition, a statue was commissioned to celebrate this event. Eduardo Paolozzi, who was a Scottish sculptor, received the commission and produced this statue of Newton, which is huge, enormous, in the front yard of the current site of the British Library. It's a beautiful image of Newton. What's very mysterious, it shows a Newton in this position, looking downwards with a pair of compasses, doing some probably geometrical work. It raised a number of questions. What is this representation of Newton? I think that it goes back to this image by William Blake around the 1800s, where Blake presents the same posture of Newton doing exactly the same work of tracing diagrams with his instrument. This image by Blake was not a friend of Newton, was actually an enemy of Newton. But this image of Newton is even more mysterious because it presents Newton as if you can make out the details, he's sitting at the bottom of the sea and like on a rock, and there are marine creatures, marine algae around him. Why is Newton sitting? What is Newton doing at the bottom of the sea? I think that this is a reminiscence of the myth that Plato recounts at the end of the Phaedo, where Socrates says that we are all living like at the bottom of a great sea, or a great ocean, and we can't actually see reality because everything is flooded above us. We are just sitting at the bottom of a great ocean. And the myth goes on to tell the story of how what Socrates will see as he will leave his body and die and migrate to the other world. So in this picture, we see a Newton there at the bottom doing his own scientific activity, but the message seems to be that the scientific activity is still missing something important, still just the beginning of the journey upwards, which will liberate and let the soul see reality as it is. I still have 5 minutes, and then I will stop there with a tentative conclusion and suggestion. I said at the beginning that unfortunately I'm very limited. My scope is limited to the Western tradition and the mythology, which I know best is the Greek mythology. I'm much less familiar with other mythologies. But I found something very interesting in American Indian mythologies, where there is a figure which is very much present in American Indian mythologies, and to a certain extent has traits and elements of the demon, the Maxwellian demon, or the different incarnations of this demon, his ability to sort things out, his ability to see things, his ability to manipulate small little devices, his ability to perceive. And this is the figure of the trickster, from which I've stolen the quotation which Jen I put in the provocative title of the talk today, the comment that physicists or scientists in general are still missing something or doing something. And I found this image in this beautiful collection of stories, which was published in the 1950s, collected by informants on the figure of the tricksters and what the trickster achieves and does, and so on. So I would like to show you actually this briefly a little passage, which is the one which gives the quotation of the title of the talk. Here it is. The Trickster, a study in American Indian mythology by Paula Raden, and this was published in the 1950s, but actually the story was collected in the early 20th century. So I hope you can see this. This will be my brain under a magnetic resonance as I'm listening to the story.
When he looked at this, to his annoyance, he was holding in each hand a scabby-mouthed duck. In no way perturbed, however, he shouted,
This is the way a man acts. Indeed, these ducks will make fine soup to drink.
Then he made a fire and cut some sharp-pointed sticks with which to roast them. Some he roasted in this manner, while others he roasted by covering them with ashes.
I will wait for them to be cooked,
He said to himself.
I had, however, better go to sleep now. By the time I awake, they will unquestionably be thoroughly done. Now you, my younger brother, must keep watch for me while I go to sleep. If you notice any people, drive them off.
He was talking to his anus. Then, turning his anus toward the fire, he went to sleep.
Okay. All right, here I am back to the scene. That was a quotation taken from this passage, one of the story, which gave me the phrase for the for the introduction. And then scientists and physicists still talking to their anus, asking their anus to watch over as they fall asleep, suggesting that they're not recognizing that myth and science must cross their path inevitably somehow, and that there are many signs of this happening right now. Might modern science actually be our own great mythology, as Western, as in the as here in the 21st century? Might science itself be our own greatest mythological corpus that contemporary civilization has developed? Are there signs and symptoms that this might be the case? I think that some signs and symptoms are definitely there. There are these presences, ambiguous presences, interesting presences, problematic presences in the literature, these strange creatures populating here and there, the scientific literature. There are other interesting symptoms. One which strikes me the most is, where should I look for it? In the most unlikely of all possible places, which is the fact that modern science is dominated by mathematics. As we know, since Galileo, physics became mathematical physics, and mathematics is the language of science. Galileo says the book of nature is written in mathematical language. If you don't know mathematics, you don't know how to read the book of nature. Why am I saying this? Because following the line of thought of the great anti-enlightenment vehicle, that myth is, some of the mythical thinking is an attempt to articulate and verbalize in language which succeed in certain ways, but it is up against the problem of rendering into language a content which is not immediately accessible to language. A little bit like dream. As you know, it's very difficult to language the experience of dream without betraying it. Mathematics, the powerful presence of mathematics in modern science since Galileo and since Newton, has something of this. There's something symptomatic. Mathematics is not languageable. It's very hard to read it. It cannot be uttered. It cannot be spoken. Especially modern mathematics, with the abandonment of Greek mathematics based on geometry and the diagram, with the advent of modern analytical mathematics, with the advent of the calculus, which became the operating system of modern science, this new mathematics is even less accessible to language being spoken. It cannot be spoken. So what we do when we do mathematical science or mathematical physics, or we use mathematics as a language of science following Galileo and Newton, is this attempt to verbalize, to language, to speak, which come up against something which resists this attempt to being language. And that leads me to the point of view that at the very core of science, being science mathematized, there might be there a symptom, a clue that the entire enterprise is, in fact, in its own essence, our own modern great mythology. So I will leave it there. I hope that there is enough food for thought, for discussion and questions, and hopefully something will come up with, will improve, or make better what I tried to pull together today. So I've not seen anybody here. Thank you very much. I hope that you were able to follow me. I see Edouard now showing up in my screen. And so, well, Edouard, now
I'm going to take the lead now. Wonderful, Paolo. Thank you very much. We can't really clap, but I'll clap for everyone. Let me remind you how we're going to be proceeding. If you have a question for Paolo, please put your click on the Q&A button and just put your name on the text box, and I will promote you to the panelist status, and you can ask your question to Paolo directly. And it's going to take always a few seconds to move you from the attendee status to the panelist status. So while people are thinking about a possible question they might have, all right, I'm going to try to do both at the same time. Let me just get started then before Nick Huggett is joining us. I was wondering, I mean, it's not what my area of research, but I was wondering whether some of these topics are more promoting the a mythological way of thinking in or around science. I don't know whether you would find a similar form of mythological thinking around, for example, molecular biology, very much driven by technology, or around maybe population genetics, or the fact that it touches to physics and to fundamental questions about maybe the universe. I wonder whether it's not one of the reasons why somehow thought experimenting and all this mythological way of thinking is invited or prompted in scientist theorization. And it's all about possible the content of the science somehow be promoting this intersection between mythology and science.
Yes, definitely. I think so. That the content of the science, in this case, physics and thermodynamics in particular, because one of the things that Planck says in the video is that thermodynamics actually was interesting to him because it seems to transcend this problem of whether matter is continuous or discrete, atomistic. It doesn't matter. Thermodynamics seems to live in a different order. So that was interested in. In other sciences, I don't know. I mean, I'm not familiar with enough with the literature to say. I don't know if there are. I think I read something in a possible way of instantiating examples of these activities of Maxwell's demon in a biological context. I think that there probably it would be in a different direction. However, you are right. If it is the content of the science which somehow stimulates or provokes these images to float, then in the case of biology, wouldn't it be something like the questions of life and what life is?
Exactly what I had in mind. I was wondering whether in the case of biology, the origins of life wouldn't be exactly the place where we would find very similar form of writing as we find in these parts of physics. Yes, that's exactly what I had in mind. And for example, in psychology, it might be in relation to decision making because of relation with freedom, for example. So it might be some of the themes are very congenial, maybe one might say, to mythologizing, maybe more than others. It's just a speculation anyway.
Yeah, I think so. But if we are living powerfully in a mythical framework without recognizing it, to give you a very crude and rough analogy, we might be like the phase of Greek civilization which precedes pre-Socratic philosophers and Plato and Aristotle, still there, or at least transitioning into that age of the sophists, and then Plato and Aristotle, Socrates. If we live in a powerfully mythological framework, we might not be able yet to recognize this.
Yeah, I mentioned Daniel Linford in the chat mentions there's a great discussion of mythology and biochemistry in Jeremy Englund's Every Life is on Fire, which somehow goes a bit again what I was saying. So thank you, Daniel. Let me know whether you want to join us. Nick, do you want to take it from there?
Sure. Yeah. Oops. Oh, I forgot to put a more professional background on before coming to the talk today. Sorry for that. Thanks, Paolo. That was interesting, and I really enjoyed the interview with Max Planck. I didn't know any such thing existed, so that was pretty cool to see that. And actually, you just touched on it, but that was my question. I think I followed some of the other later points about sort of different kinds of things that myth can be. And this question at the end about whether about are we living in a myth? But could you kind of go back to how what Planck is saying is playing into this question of myths? I saw him talk about some of his attitudes towards the microphysical and to quantum mechanics. But could you just, now I've seen the rest of the talk, go back to Planck and say how it fits in a bit? And partly what I have in mind, I understand, my understanding of Planck is actually he was very resistant to kind of Boltzmann approach to statistical mechanics, to thermodynamics, and whether that's and I think because he thought the second law was really not probabilistic. So is that part of the story here? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so what is part of the story? Part of the story is, yes, he was resistant, but then he transitioned actually in this attempt to dispel this ghost of anthropomorphism, which plagues the understanding of the second law of thermodynamics up until the transition into the statistical view of Boltzmann, which eventually Planck accepts and actually makes the foundation of his own interpretation of the second law. And he receives that very well, because it's the only way to escape anthropomorphism, because it moves the second law from an understanding which is a preference in nature to an understanding which is a preference intended as just a state of higher probability. But this question of removal of anthropomorphism, of overcoming the anthropomorphism, if you think about it for a moment, the project of keep removing an anthropomorphic element from scientific theory, where is this pointing to? In his own understanding, in Planck's understanding, is pointing us towards understanding the world as the world is in itself. The world as it is in itself, the story of the world as it is in itself is actually, I think, converging with an idea of myth, which I also placed in the quote of the title, which is very much an idea which I find interesting and thought-provoking, is that myth is when the world is telling its own story to itself. And so when the story of the world is told by the world to itself, I think there we are at a maximum, is where myth is, and there is where I think anthropomorphism has been totally removed. I'm probably not making myself clear or anything here, but so I think in this way.
Yeah, no, please say more. But I think that what you've said already is very helpful. I remember because part of the interview was where I guess when he was talking about how he learned his mathematics and how he was going to tame nature with mathematics, and that's the sort of de-anthropomorphizing, I take it.
Yeah, I think that it's like this, that As anthropomorphism goes down, and then myth goes up. So here is Planck telling us that we need to dislodge anthropomorphism from science. And I think when we get there to a minimum of anthropomorphism is where myth really is in its full glory, because here is no anthropomorphism. Myth is the word telling the story to itself. I know that's maybe a bit adventurous, but how I think about it.
Thank you. No, that does sort of help. I think I'm still going to have to think about wrapping my head around the last point about myth, what myth is. Okay, I want to listen to some more questions. I'm sure that'll get developed. Thank you, but that does help me understand the place of Planck in this.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. Marina, go for it.
Yeah. Thanks, Paolo. This was super interesting. And I actually had a question that kind of was similar to Nick's, and I also about the sort of relationship between Planck and the way that you portrayed Maxwell's demon. And as I was listening to your response, I was very surprised because I was actually thinking about myth and demons as, yes, being a way of telling the world to ourselves, but like exploring our humanity and the human limitations of our knowledge rather than de-anthropomorphizing our knowledge, right? So I don't know if you know this book by Jimena Canales that is the history of demons in science. I'll send you, if you don't know it, I'll send you the reference. It's a wonderful book that I have only skimmed, but she really shows how demons have been used to sort of explain the limits of our knowledge. So I think in that way, I was understanding mythology as sort of explaining the limits of our own humanity. So being more speaking to the anthropomorphic nature of knowledge rather than the opposite. And that's the way that I was sort of understanding, like the way that Planck was trying to was criticizing the demon as saying like demons are maybe too anthropomorphic and we need to find a different kind of point of view, and that's what he didn't like. But yeah, so I had a question that turned into a comment because I was kind of reacting to the way that you were responding to Nick's question. So I don't know, I was wondering if you could keep elaborating on the relationship between Planck and his and the way that people have characterized Maxwell's demon and what the tension is there. A little bit more about what exactly you think Planck is doing when he is criticizing this sort of way of thinking about.
Okay, so for Planck, I think we need to ask Planck scholar. I myself am not a Planck scholar. I actually savagely used Planck to my own purposes and devices. So maybe yes, there is this tension that maximizing or if you like, minimizing anthropomorphism in as Planck is saying, to my mind, takes us closer actually to the mythical scene. Because the word telling the story of its own to the world, to itself, is placing us, I think, in a much more modest position. It places us in a position of modesty, of listeners. We are the ones who listen to the world telling its own story to itself. Of course, yes, we are part of the world.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, so I think that to that extent, it's there is the tension, I think. We are listening. I think there is the tension. Planck had a very, Planck comes, as he says at the beginning, Planck from a family of theologians and philologists. And anthropomorphism is certainly very prominent in theological thinking, in Protestant theology, the problem of anthropomorphism is very sensitive. And so I think that there might be something there worth investigating. But again, because I'm not a Planck scholar,
Mike,
yeah.
Mike, do you want to go next?
Sure, sure.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, Paolo, that was fascinating, and I was wondering.
Go for it, Mike. Yeah, it was 2 mics on the screen, so go for it then.
I was sort of wanted to go off of Edward's question about where you would find this kind of talk in biology, and my immediate thought was that biology doesn't have demons; it has monsters, and plenty of them. And the sort of creation of monstrosities in the 20th century sort of pulls off of that the Frankenstein legend, right? That the monsters are cautionary tales. But in fact, if you sort of look at the creation of hybrids and monstrosities, chimeras, and things like that, through the history of the 20th century, they don't actually become controversial as long as they're animal-animal chimeras. So they start to become very controversial when they become human-animal chimeras. And so it's sort of something about the transgression of that human-animal boundary that sort of creates the problem with monsters, at least among the general public, until the 1970s, when people become much more aware of the kind of problematic nature of other kinds of changings of nature. So I wonder if you think that sort of, I don't know, it's kind of running a little bit counter to the demon narrative in some ways, in that it's a cautionary narrative as opposed to us listening to nature. It's about what we shouldn't do to nature, maybe.
Yeah, that's all fine. I think that as we embrace this idea of being modestly in a mythical framework, then we have to be prepared to give up certain of our own commitments and certainties and so on. So I'm not displeased, neither discomforted by the fact that there are, shall we say, competing, if not contradictory. That's mythical thinking takes us into that frame of mind where there is coexistence rather than opposition. In the 19th century, in the late 19th century, there was an Italian naturalist and zoologist who published a book entitled Myth and Science, in which he relates incredible experiments that he was doing with animals, because his intent was to show that animals think in a mythical framework. The tendency to animation, to project animation into the world, is very much in animal behavior, non-human animal behavior. That is a very interesting, I think, line of thinking which has sort of probably been lost, but might be revived or become complementary to what you were saying, I think, about crossing the boundaries between human versus non-human.
Thank you, Mike. Mike Schneider, floor is yours.
Hi. So there's a lot that I'm still chewing on, which hopefully doesn't reflect in the eloquence or lack thereof of the question I'm about to ask. So I feel as if I was primed in a slightly different direction than I understand you to have gone by the Planck video. So when I saw the interview with Planck, the thing that popped out to me was the contrast between everything else and then the hard constraining features of mathematics or logic or formal tools. And that made me think of the idea of myths or mythos in science more generally as somehow being a more expansive toolkit. And so then the question I would think winds up being, is there something lost that we care about in our move to restrict our methods? But then you wound up in a very different place, if I understood it at the end, which is that science, that the theories we've gotten is perhaps the greatest mythos that we collectively have developed, which seems to suggest that it's fine that we pared down our methods in that way, because that is what enabled us to get to this particular grandiose myth. So I'm wondering how to navigate the idea that on the one hand, we're restricting our toolkit down to just some very sterile instrumentation, and on the other hand, allowing that process of restricting down to give us these expansive narratives.
Yes, let me think here. That's very interesting. Yes, by narrowing down the scope of our instruments and technologies and tools for thinking and so on, yes, we create this this body of that we call of literature and thinking and knowledge that we call modern science, or the greatest of all mythological frameworks. I tend to, when I'm looking for, when I think and I don't know how to think, I tend to look for analogies, and my analogy here is I keep thinking about the same, if there is an analogy with the transition in Greece in the 5th century from a civilization which was mostly oral tradition, myth-oriented, to a civilization which becomes writing-oriented, rational, sophistic, and so on, with a consciousness developing away from the mythical scene. And there in the middle, I find that there is, yes, a great technological transition, which is the advent of writing. Now, in the modern times, let's see if this works as an analogy. What I would say is that, yes, it does restrict this, and perhaps because of this restriction then forces you in a very creative mood, a bit like painters that not necessarily have great palettes. There are impressionist painters, they work with a limited number of colors. Sometimes very limited. It's incredible how limited the palette can be, and yet the creativity and the work can be at the same time immense. So the restriction maybe is not the issue. But working on the analogy of ancient Greece with present day, then if we are in this, in a mythical framework, we are still living this transition into something which we cannot foresee at the moment. We cannot foresee what this, if there will be an age coming of, say, consciousness, where this great construction that we call modern science becomes subject to scrutiny and consciousness, the same way that pre-Socratic Greece became subject of consciousness and criticism in the age of the philosophers. And therefore, what the philosophers will be of the future, who will scrutinize and criticize our current great construction. Maybe it will be the philosophers, maybe it will be the artists, maybe it will be new, I don't know what the type will be. I don't think we can say what it will be like. Have I gone off to another tangent, maybe?
I'm not sure. It's interesting nonetheless. I guess, so this makes me think that I might have been having the wrong picture of what the I guess word myth is doing in the sort of rhetoric of how you're thinking. So I was thinking that the idea was that, for lack of a better way of putting this, there is a stable concept of myth that sort of modern science as a whole falls into in just the same way as these others do. But it sounds like from the response, what you were just saying, that it's not that there's a stable concept of myth that these different items are fitting into. It's that the way we are now accustomed to thinking about myths from the vantage point of our comfort with modern science is that's the thing that is somehow generic, and conceivably there would be another sense in which we might be standing in a different terrain looking at modern science as we currently do to myths. Is that right?
Yeah, I think this, what you said, I think is right to me, that myth is not stable, is rather this coexisting presence of in thinking. That is, so it's not the stories. The stories are myth, then congealed, consolidated, told and retold many times, as opposed to myth as a style of thinking. It's a mythical way of thinking, which is the line of Vico. So it's not about the stories. We are not going to, I think, recreate the stories of Proteus, of course. That's happened uniquely in Greek mythology at one precise point in time, space, geography there. It's totally unique. So we have created different stories. It's the stories, the body of literature that we call modern science. That's our own mythology. We are still living in, I think, this powerful mythological framework. And then the age, I think, of the sophists, to continue the analogy, the age of the sophists, the age of Plato, the age of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, it's still coming. We don't know what it will be like, the age which will look at this body of myth that we created, modern science, and take a new stance and possibly move away into a new direction, into something which we cannot foresee or we cannot envisage right now, no more so than, say, Homer could envisage the age of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle.
I'll intervene because we only have 8 minutes and we've got 3 more people in the queue. So let me ask all of you to ask short questions and, if it's possible, short answers. So, Daniel Linford, floor is.
Yeah. So, well, first, let me just take 5 seconds to plug the book I put into the chat, which is Jeremy England's "Every Life Is on Fire." It's so England is a physicist, but he's also a rabbi, and he's interested in part of what he's interested in that book is the relationship between Jewish mythology and the thermodynamics of life. But I wanted to ask if you thought that, I mean, I don't know, maybe if this isn't a short question, we can skip it. But the question that I wanted to ask was something like, do you think that this sort of reflection on the relationship between, or your reflection on the relationship between science and mythology can help us to think about questions about the relationship between science and religion?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, I mean, for the religious element has always been considered as part of the understanding of myth. To what extent does this play and exist in our own framework? I think so. Yes, definitely. I mean, definitely. The answer to me would be yes.
That was a quick answer.
If we had more time, I'd ask, like, what does that exactly look like? But if you want to, like, some of the people are here that have questions, I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. And,
I will keep thinking about this, and then we'll.
Julia, please go next.
Yeah, hi. Paolo, it was such a provocative and wide-ranging talk, and Edward's given me this sort of impossible task of asking a short, compact question. So the image that kept coming to mind for me, especially in the Q&A, was Kekule's dream of the Ouroboros that gave him the structure of benzene. And it's come up for me a number of times as I listen to your answers to the questions, both in the way you talk about the definition of myth as sort of the story telling itself, like the snake eating its tail, but then also in thinking about how myth figures into scientific thinking across different sciences. I mean, we heard monsters in biology, we heard demons in physics, and this image of the snake eating its own tail is a very different sort of mythical or symbolic image. And so I just kind of wanted to throw it out there and see if that sparks anything for you.
Oh yeah, it does, because I'm familiar with these images, are chemical images, and alchemy, and the presence of alchemy in in the early modern period, as it would be extremely, I think, interesting to explore. Yes, how these images come back into different branches of science. I'm not familiar with, of course, but I'm sure that in chemistry and biology, as we were talking about, there's plenty more to explore there, and the way things are visualized, or like the case of the Ouroboros, or the snake closing on its own tail. Yes, definitely. I think that this is, for me, is more like a foray into a territory which I'm, as you. I mean, I'm neither an expert nor I'm familiar with the landscapes, and what caught my imagination was this early literature, the demon, and the question of myth as thinking and co-present in our own culture. What it is, if it is, what it would be like. Where is it? Where are we going to look for it? Okay, so that was my initial puzzle. But yes.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Paolo.
Julia.
Thanks, Julia. Justin, you have the last question. We can't see you and we cannot hear you. Justin?
Unmute.
Yeah, let me unmute. Justin Belay? All right, I guess Justin might have left while leaving his camera on. So I think we are reaching the end of, the end of our time, as well as, there's actually another in the chat I also will mention, because Mahi has added another reference in the chat called Circles Disturbed, the interplay of mathematics and narrative, which she thinks also bear on our discussion today. It's been an interesting chat, actually. In any case, we're reaching the end of our usual 1 hour and a half meeting, and it's been actually a very successful and interesting talk and Q&A. So thanks, Paolo, for this presentation, and thanks to all of you also for joining us and taking part to this interesting discussion. I hope to see most of you next week on Tuesday for Sabrina Smith's talk, and I remember on Wednesday there's Liz Molin's presentation, and on Friday at 3:30 John Ioannidis will be talking about meta science and the challenges to good science. Have a good weekend, and thank you again, Paolo.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.